Welcome to another episode of The Rabbi and The Therapist. And today we're very pleased to have a guest. Her name is Sorele Witkes, and she is a licensed clinical social worker who's been practicing for 40 years and sees a variety of different individuals of different ages with different problems. Today we're actually going to be focusing in on the relationship between parents and children. So with that, welcome, Sorele.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here today.
Great.
So is there an opening statement that you would have to give advice either to children or to parents or for both parents and children?
An opening statement. What I know for sure is that every parent ideally and intrinsically wants to have a perfect, good relationship with their children. And every child is both entitled and craves a good relationship with their parents. Unfortunately, that is not always the case, and I guess that's what we're going to really try and delve into here.
And I think it's a perfect opening. I think it's a very, very important point. I think children have to remember that parents are really trying their best. They do love their children, as children have to really know the same thing about children. It's interesting. Our greatest investment in life is marriage and building a family, yet we really don't go for any type of schooling of how to be a parent. You don't, before you get pregnant, you don't go to class, and your doctor doesn't say, before I deliver you wonderful, beautiful baby, hey, did you take these courses? Did you check this checklist? So on a practical level, if I come to you now having a problem with one of my children, or estrangement, or simply maybe I'm abusive, what is the number one sort of line that you see, advice that you think parents need to know?
I think when a child approaches a parent at whatever age and they're able to articulate that something they believe was not done correctly to them, or they understand that their parent wasn't there for them, it's fundamental and critical for a parent to be able to take a deep breath, listen, and hear and validate what their child is saying. And from there, a conversation can begin. Unfortunately, what often happens is the defense mechanism goes into place, both for children and for parents. We're wired that way. We don't want to be accused, or, as a parent myself and as a grandparent, I could tell you it's hard work and we try our best. We don't always get it right, not intentionally, but that's the reality.
I have two follow-up questions for what you just said, actually. Very interesting. In your experience, at what age, every child at the age, when hormones kick in?
Right.
Okay? Every child, that old adage, it's like when you're 3, my father knows everything, and then by the time, then he knows nothing, and then when you're old, he knows everything. But at what age, typically, do you start seeing that kind of insight to where a child will come to a parent and say, look, I now, retrospectively looking back, see that what you said to me, what you did to me, has left me in some type of distress and gets in the way of a closer relationship. On average, when do you usually see that, if there is a particular age? Yeah.
So it's a fascinating question, because that question has changed over time, right? When I was growing up, the concept of questioning if your parents were right or wrong just didn't exist. That probably doesn't hit a child of my age till they're really, really, really much older. I think today, late adolescence, and certainly when adult children are becoming parents, the questions are arising.
It's interesting, if I may interrupt for a moment, interject, I should say. When you gave that opening statement, what went through my mind was the age of when you become a parent yourself, and then you come back to your parents and say, I now see these things differently. Of course, when you say again, if you go back 40 years, it was different when people were, the average person getting married was 21 and 22.
Right.
Today, the average person getting married is 28, 29. And I'm wondering if then does that shift? Does the age, that I have new more with age or more with responsibility? Now that I'm a parent, I say, hey, I think my parents maybe did things that really messed me up.
I'm going to say something as a lead into what I hope is going to be more explication. Very frequently, the ramifications of dysfunctional parenting start rearing their head before you have children. It starts rearing your head when you try to pick a mate.
Right.
Now, go.
That's very interesting. So that's it. Yes, I would agree with that. That happens. We see that quite often where someone will come into therapy wondering why they can't find their soulmate, right? And wondering what it is that's happening. What are they avoiding? And they have to sort of start searching, going inward and saying, what is it that I'm not feeling good about? Or what is it that people either turn me down, or when something gets too good to be true, I reject it and walk away. And often that's the child-parent relationship that they haven't worked through or haven't really ever admitted or spoken aloud, that has been fostering.
So I know that that's one of your areas of expertise, dealing with couples and marriage. I know you're launching something for married, particularly to women, but married women. But let's talk about a little bit more in the adolescent, I think, as the doctor mentioned before, when they're going through changes themselves, what we call the teenage years. How much of that do we see? And I also want to soon go into the topic of, is there something that's called abuse of parents?
So abusive parents is a very wide gamut, right? Because there's abuse that's very clearly defined, right? You know, if a child is sexually abused or physically abused, it's very clear to define, right? There are certain, parameters that it's easy and we can clearly assess that. But when we're talking about control or intimidation or criticism, that's much harder to define. And it's as, in late adolescence when, the hormones are kicking in and a child is trying to become independent and yet they don't feel confident to be able to, or they lack what perhaps they see their friends being able to do, then we start to say what's going on, or they start to question, why am I different? What's wrong with me? Why am I not included, or why do I exclude myself? So we often see that as a result of a perpetual hammering of not building confidence in a child, which a parent, sometimes does with the intention of making their child stronger and be able to, face the world. But in reality, that's where we need our cuddling, that's where we need our holding, that's the space that we want to feel safest.
You mentioned before about giving that child the legitimacy, or giving them the strength that, yes, in fact, this is a case. And what if it's not the case? Or if it's questionable if it's the case? Or I may know the parent because I may be a sibling, or I may know the parents because it's related to me, or just simply I know your parents. The things that you remember, it's not exactly what happened. At that point, do you fight with that young person, or do you give them some level of legitimacy?
So you're asking, I think, in the therapeutic world, the child or person or adult that's sitting with you, their truth is their truth. It's their reality. And we validate that. Where that takes us is, with the healthy, good expertise of a therapist that understands what coercive control is, what manipulative thoughts might be, we navigate and we talk about that. But for the most part, two children in the same family can have a completely different experience. And that I've seen in my practice alone, where I've seen brothers describe, we grew up really poor. We didn't have enough food, and we wore hand-me-down clothes, and the other siblings say, "What? We had the best of everything. I just don't understand." And literally, from two boys that literally shared the same bedroom. So it was a perspective, the age difference, they were 3-4 years apart, but it really was true for both of them from their perspective and their understanding, whether it was entitlement or whether it was from other kids and friends that they were seeing or their real experience in the home.
Sorele, I laugh because to me, when I was growing up, it was almost, wow, I am now old enough or big enough to fit into my older brother's, pair of slacks. It was almost somewhat of a status. I'm now moving up. The hand-me-downs were something very, very special. I'm now able to wear the suit or clothing or shoes that my older brother wore.
And how would your grandchildren feel about that today? It's a very different world, a very, very different world that we live in.
Yeah, clearly you did not need to go to a psychotherapist. That's my conclusion. But barring these situations, and they do exist, of individuals who their children who make a cottage industry over blaming the parents for everything, and that includes embellishment and magnification of things that maybe were not necessarily real. I think that's the minority, yeah. But I think what you articulated very well is that it's kind of hard to provide one definition because you have, if you're aware of the work Stella Chase did, they took infants and they followed them longitudinally over 25 years and came to the very definitive conclusion that the adjustment of the child was not a function only of the characteristics of the child or only the characteristics of the parents, but was the match between them, which really explains why two children from the same household could have very, very different experiences. But then you do cross the line, which you mentioned, to which I can't remember the name of the author, but he wrote this book called Soul Murder, which is, as you said, you have these very obvious examples where there are markers, sexual abuse, physical abuse, but this whole issue of emotional abuse, where the murder victim, so to speak, is their soul, right? Which can be murdered either directly through criticism, etc. On the contrary, we also see cases of parents who spoil their child and essentially don't let them grow and individuate, which is also another form of abuse.
By the way, in that, I just want to add, because as you're saying, what's flashing in my mind, shame has been one of the greatest tools within the Hasidic world. That is probably one of the most torturous punishments that you can give, shame.
Shame over
any behavior or over any performance or anything that you're doing. I happen to have, if I go back to my own childhood, I think it's a very manipulative and abusive thing. I think shame should almost never be used. Self-shame is enough. Shame brought upon by parents, teachers, schools, authority, I think is actually very, very destructive. We're fighting for time, and I just want to talk about, you mentioned the abuse of parents, and I write in my book about one of the cases, and halachically, the rabbi who will have to make a decision for that child if they're halachically abusive and therefore have the permission to move away from the parents, ignore the parents. Literally, the Talmud tells us in the tractate of Shabbos, 31b, actually. I don't remember too many places, but this part of the Talmud, because it comes up, I remember it, where the rabbi actually ran away, moved away, that he should not have to live next to his mother, who was somewhat abusive. To us, it's more concrete. It's black on white. Today, I mean, I tell my children know, they quote me on this, the most abused word in the English language is abuse. And how does one measure that? You said, of course, we want to give validity to validation to the patient, but beyond, what if the patient is simply wrong?
So I'm not
Sorry,
going to
but
say...
I'm a little confused by what you mean by wrong.
Wrong meaning that their experience is simply not what took place. You know, you remember something that never happened.
Without
False memory syndrome.
No, I get it. But without getting into those individual cases, I'm really interested to know, regardless of the legitimacy, let's put it that
Right.
way. What are therapeutically? What are the reasonable options for a child? And a child doesn't imply a child. It
Right.
could be an adult
Yeah,
child.
right.
Okay. What are the options that they have if they have concluded that their ongoing relationship with their parent is negative, toxic, unpleasant, causes distress? What options do they have, and then what are the pluses and minuses of each one?
So it's a very broad question, but
Very much so. Yeah.
let's try and talk about it from the broad, and then we'll narrow it down. I think in the broad sense, adult children, once we have validated their childhood experiences, we then help them look at the child that didn't have the ability to stand up for themselves then, and now looking back as the adult and perhaps as a parent now to your own children. So what happens is there's a shift of realization that perhaps, although the experience really felt that the parent wasn't supportive or was very highly critical, from the adult perspective, they are sometimes able to reassess, reformulate, re-understand maybe even the parent's limitations, right? Maybe the parent was not, like you said earlier, parents are not educated on how to become a parent. They're repeating the cycle of their style of parenting. And, you know, so we want to break the cycle. So we empower the adult child. So what will you do differently, right? So that's that piece on the broader sense. And then on the side of where, how do you manage a relationship with a parent that you feel triggers you, or can ongoingly still make those remarks or make you feel uncomfortable, or your wife or your children, etc. You have to learn how to set boundaries within a respectful manner. We don't have to go out and, you know, sever ties with parents in most cases. It just needs to be on limited times, on your turf sometimes, maybe inviting your parents to you. So it's a limited interaction, but you can re-empower yourself how that interaction is going to be. And that's very, very, you know, in the, sometimes children don't believe they even as adults have that ability to say, Mom and Dad, we're going to come on Sunday from 2 to 3 because we have other prior arrangements. They don't feel sometimes even able to come up with that kind of solution. So once they're empowered and it works, so they've set up good boundaries and they feel much better about the relationship. Because in my experience, there are very, very, very few children, adult children, myself included. I'm a mature woman, grandchild. I still want my parents' approval. Every child craves their parents' nurturing. So we might have to reset the boundaries, and we may have to look at other ways of accomplishing that. But I don't think severing the ties is easy as it sounds.
It might not be easy, but what about the no contact option, which frankly is advocated quite frequently, when dealing with spouses who find themselves with toxic spouses. What about that no contact option?
So, when it comes to...
When you're an adult with adult parents, obviously, yeah.
I think that...
Are there situations where that's appropriate?
Exactly. There are definitely situations where that's appropriate. I think when we touch on the topic of spousal, separation, we have a much more clearer, definition of doing that. But I think that I've witnessed adult children, as their children are growing up, that's when they realize what they didn't have as a child very often. So something's been, niggling at them, something's been troubling them, but they haven't really been able to articulate it till they see what their unconditional love to their own child really is, or not scolding them for something they couldn't avoid or something that they made a mistake about, and all of a sudden something floods them with anger about, oh my gosh, I remember when that happened to me as a child. And the reaction, can be sometimes...
In that direction, yeah. I think we're out of time for today. I think let's, in the next episode, perhaps talk about some of those other options. Well, for obvious reasons, and we'll get into it next session. In the meantime, if any of you have any questions or comments about this episode, down below, you will see our email address and we'll be happy to receive them and get back to you. For now, goodbye.